Welcome, welcome everyone. We are here with Dr. Kyra Bobinet, who is a physician, a public health leader, and a behavior change designer focused on tranquility, transformation, and healing to build optimal health and fulfilling, meaningful lives. She's the author of the best-selling book, Unstoppable Brain, which I couldn't put down, by the way. This is the new neuroscience that frees us from failure, eases our stresses, and creates lasting change. It's about a lot more than that, as we'll learn from our conversation today. She's also a keynote speaker, a live presenter, and the CEO of Try, which creates this behavior change software, which we'll talk about today. And she addresses topics such as behavior change, self-care, and personal growth for high influence leaders, and what long-term neuroscience research tells us about habits and lifestyle changes. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you.
So what I love to do always at the beginning is rewind the clock a little bit for people who are new to your work. And I always believe it's useful to have a foundation of where you came from, right? And what
Mm-hmm.
brought you into this work and why you're passionate about what you do. So you
Mm-hmm.
grew up in Oklahoma and you had a fast food addiction as a kid. And I'm sure that many viewers out there and listeners can resonate with that. It seems to be one of the major catalysts, right, that drove you to do what you do. Were there any other catalysts along the way that also led to your work today?
Yeah, I mean, certainly my mom having PTSD. She's Ojibwe and had a very traumatic, was taken at age 5 to a boarding school, was beaten and sexually assaulted, all these things through the foster care system and removed from her people, removed from her culture, punished for speaking her language. And so being the daughter of somebody who is remarkably surviving that, but then also not thriving was a huge kind of like, case study for me throughout my life of wanting to, help her, wanting to heal her and really feeling almost like a survivor guilt, if you will, that my life wasn't as bad as hers was, And so there's a lot of like complicated things, I think, with all of our mothers. I haven't met a single person who has not had some sort of complicated psychology with their mothers. It's a very powerful relationship. But I think that really got me interested in helping people and um, healing people and finding the truth about ourselves, wherever that lie.
Yeah, I think when we go through that sort of early trauma ourselves, right, it sort of lends it to what can I do in my life to change what isn't working.
Hmm. Hmm.
Forward wind the clock, right? And you've done a lot of research and you've had a lot of aha moments, so to speak. There's a part of the brain, the habenula, behaves to shut down our ability to make a lasting, meaningful change in our life, whether it's exercise, a shift in our work, or stress, or reducing stress, or weight loss. But you also mentioned that it's a kill switch for motivation, right? And this applies to business life as well as our personal life. So
Hmm.
there's two questions here. What led to these findings? And then what did you learn along the way that really kind of shaped what ultimately became your book?
Hmm. Yeah. So I am a translational scientist, meaning that, I started out in bench science, I went to medicine, I went to public health. And what I really found, kind of my niche is that if something exists in science, I can translate it into daily life so that the world can improve or so that people's lives can improve. So that's where I place my efforts. And long ago, I realized that I wasn't going to be a prescriber, which is what physicians are pretty much. They're either surgeons or prescribers in large part. And that to me wasn't the idea of health and healing. It was figuring out what's going on with us on a fundamental first principles basis, and then being able to use that to solution on that. So little clues kind of existed throughout my history. There was one study I was running with Duke University on mindfulness eating, and this woman was like, I did a midterm interview with her, and she was like, well, I know what to do. Why don't I do it? And that just articulated the universal problem. Whether, like you said, it's for our business or our parenting or our relationships or our eating or our sleeping, whatever domain of our lives we have, wherever we have I know what to do, I just don't do it, um, is the problem. Because if you could unblock that, you would be unstoppable, right? Which is why I called the book Unstoppable Brain.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then it was finding the mechanism, the mechanism of what is stopping us. And the mechanism that's stopping us is the habenula. And I don't do basic research on habenula. I read that, synthesize it, and apply it, to software and different other kinds of things. So the habenula, it turns out, is the master control switch of our behavior and our mood. It is the most significant finding, composite finding, because it's only been really studied heavily for the last 10 years. And I think that, what we know so far is that there's these very surefire definitions of how it operates. Number one, like you said, it is turned on by failure. It's turned on by anything negative that we think about ourselves or that we predict is going to happen to us. It is, or the past, the trauma. And then it is in control of our behavior in the way of like controlling our motivation, controls our dopamine, controls our serotonin, controls our addictions, controls our eating, like our emotional eating, controls our ability to stay asleep. It's kind of in a midbrain position above what's called the thalamus.
Yeah.
So, but it's very close to hindbrain. It's more midbrain. It isn't everything though. Zebrafish, little tiny critters, very simple critters, and then all the way up to us. So every mammal has it, and it's powerful because it needs to stop us from taking risks that will kill us or that will hurt us. And so it's engineered to protect us. But in the case of us living a life where we're overcoming trauma, where we're trying to change our behavior, where we're trying to sustain that change, this is the hidden key and our biggest obstacle.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Dr. Jill Balti Taylor's work?
No, not really.
Her first talk was, was a while ago. She's done talks since then, but your research, or at least the conclusions from your research, kind of remind me of some of the things that she's come up with. And she's a neuroanatomist, and she had a stroke,
Oh,
essentially,
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
the woman who came
Yeah.
back from. And
Yep.
so her new book, her latest book, it's not that new anymore, Whole Brain Living. It's interesting because it talks about how, we know that we have a right brain and we have a left brain, but then there's these different parts of the left brain and different parts of the right brain. And so what's fascinating to me is the parts of the creative part that shut down when she had the stroke allowed her to be in this blissful state, or, what we call in spiritual circles enlightenment. And so her work is getting curious, like you are in a way, of how do we shut down, or at least through awareness that it's controlling us, how do we shut down those parts of the brain that are dictating our lives in a way that's not healthy and fulfilling? So it's interesting. So let's move on to trauma, because that there's a perfect segue to this. I know you're not a psychologist or a therapist, but you mentioned Dr. Gabor Mate in the book, and then you also
Hmm.
talk about the habenula as a
Hmm.
player in addiction, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I believe in a holistic approach, and I think many of the people who watch this series do as well, and the whole mind-body connection. And, we know that, at least in those circles, that everything's connected. So it makes me wonder, how do you think that these discoveries of this part of the brain, right, who have trauma, whether that's an individualized case, a one-off, or repeated trauma, how do you think it can help people who are suffering from trauma?
Well, first of all, I think that they can be deshamed by it. People who have been traumatized, and it's not just forgiving your perpetrator, and the person who hurt you, your abuser, whatever the case may be, or the circumstances. Maybe it was a uh, weather event, who knows? But the PTSD can be internalized as I am weak. The veteran who came back from war. I am weak. I can't get a hold of this. I used to be able to control myself. This is feels involuntary, all those kinds of things. And so there's an out of control, out of, groundlessness, out of body experience, all of that, which is why somatic stuff and psychedelic stuff really helps to cut through that. But if you look at the psychedelic medicine that's been published so far, on trauma, ibogaine, iboga, um, ketamine, we have cannabis receptors, we have nicotine receptors, which are psychoactive medications. Um, there's been no, studies done in MDMA, but, I think psilocybin maybe too. All of them are targeting this area of the brain. And the reason why they want to target this area of the brain is because it is the source of depressive feelings. The thoughts, the rumination comes from prefrontal cortex, but this is the source. This is the wellspring of our suffering. And when we are addicted to something, what we're trying to do, I believe, is just shut this up, shut the failure up, shut the failure rumination up, because it's so itchy and uncomfortable. And failure has many friends: disappointment, frustration, demoralization, helplessness. So trauma is a state of this kind of, habenula on state that's very, very painful. And that's why a lot of people with trauma have addictions or have numbing, distracting kind of activities to try to manage their symptoms of what they're experiencing. And is somehow like being able to heal that trauma, from the inside out, from the habenula out, is all about, being able to target the habenula, being able to know even cognitive behaviorally or even relationally how to turn it off. I think that's a new skill that no one's thought about. And we've kind of let failure, like we just kind of avoid failure. We're like, I don't want to talk about failure. Let's think positive. Like, we have all kinds of ways to cope with failure, but we don't actually go in and say, how do I neutralize this? If this was a fire in my house, I would get the fire extinguisher and I would be blasting it. Why don't we take it that seriously? And so I think it's going to revolutionize addiction therapy, addiction treatment, PTSD treatments, to know about this missing piece of the puzzle, which I've been looking at this for, 30 years. And this is the most hopeful that I've ever felt about those really, really stubborn, really recalcitrant conditions that we have in our psychology.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you talk about we can't circumvent it, because if we circumvent it, it's similar to, we always like to draw a bridge between the holistic world too and spirituality. And, the Buddhists will say, what we retreat from and we try to escape from just keeps showing up to be healed. And I think it's similar with this. It's really the first half of your book. It's this
Yeah,
whole performance, and I came from that world in Silicon Valley too, where everything was performance based,
yeah,
and every startup that I jumped into, it seemed like the ultimate goal was to flip it. And if you're there to flip something for money and you're not there to build something meaningful, guess what happens? You create
hmm
this culture of everybody scrambling, of
hmm
everybody working 24 hours like I used to do, and all of my colleagues used to do, and some of them still do. And then it creates, like you said, the failure, the habenula. It creates failure,
Habenula.
habenula. Oh my God, it's
Habenula. You're not
habenula.
failing at it, you're just learning it. But this is the this is the perfect moment if we can dive into this, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Because when we have an expectation to get something a certain way, and then the contrast happens, where you're struggling with the word or whatever, and then you're judging yourself, perhaps if you're just not flowing with it, you're judging yourself and you're feeling uncomfortable, you're feeling like your habenula's on right now, you
It
know,
is.
by
Yeah, I don't know what
saying
it
habenula, by trying to say habenula, and having expectations that you can't fail at that, but it's not failure. Mispronouncing something that you just heard about that no one knows about is not failure. And that's the kind of like reframing that we need to get really good at, like yoga of reframe that we need to get really good at. Because the Buddhas was right. I mean, aversion is powerful. And in the brain, the way we're wired, aversion is more powerful than desire, you know? And anybody who's ever known anybody who struggles with addiction, including themselves, knows that you don't pursue your addiction because you feel good. It's because you're trying to not feel bad. And that's a very different
It is.
thing, right? And why are we not trying to feel bad? Is because the habenula is on and it's making us suffer.
Well, that dang habenula has been working, overworking me. When I first looked at the word, when I had to say it, because obviously when I'm reading it in the book, it's different. But
Yeah.
looking through my notes, and I'm like, oh, I have to say that today, and I couldn't say it.
I've been trying to figure out if there's like a way to like create a rap or a rhyme, and it doesn't rhyme with anything. There's no substitute for it. It's amazing like how we're just gonna have to, figure out how to, memorize and just repetition, you know,
Repetition,
just
yeah.
repetition.
Habenula, habenula, habenula.
I'm the habenula lady. Like, I just want the whole world to know about this thing because then they will be powerful and then they will be, sovereign and then they will be able to get do what they want. And again, hopefully that energy is not wasted on selfishness. Like what you were talking about with the startup world. I have a startup too. I've started a startup 10 years ago and one before that. And I would not be able to do that. I have to have a mission of reducing suffering. I have to have a mission of helping people. Otherwise, I can't get up in the morning to do what I want to do.
Yeah, it needs to be aligned with purpose. We're
Absolutely.
scrambling around and we're not aligned. That's when we become sick. That's my belief, right? Is
Yeah.
that when we're out of alignment with our whole system is off, it's whole system thinking really. Um, Speaking of, and this is an old topic, Dr. John Gray talked about this back in the 80s, and that's oxytocin.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you say that we've become an oxytocin deprived society, and I could not agree more. Um, is it getting better or worse? And I know you brought up a little bit AI, right? And AI is
Mm-hmm.
exploding, so we'd be remiss if we didn't at least talk about it. Talk to us about what's actually happening with the onslaught of AI right now.
Yeah, AI and social media are kind of like a perfect storm because AI can really train our brains to be lazy and to not want to work for things. And to also just like disregard profundity, disregard information, disregard data, So we just become these like ravenous, uh, fast food equivalent, consumers of information and frivolity, just being frivolous with our time and our attention and things like that. The social media world, and I called this when I was at Stanford working in the behavior design lab, like, I was on a panel with a guy who was at Google and he was, touting how they're using behavioral science to like get people's attention and stuff like this. This was like 2012.
Mm.
And I was like, watch out, because the early studies were coming out about the relationship between depression, anxiety, and social media. And wow, did that explode further,
Yeah.
And he went on to do amazing work trying to, he formed something called the Center of Humane Technology, Tristan Harris. And I went on to develop what I developed, to try to help people with their brains. And so we both kind of saw this watershed moment where, social media basically became a um, a a Vegas casino with your brain. You're just like constantly like, lights and flashes and it's designed to keep you there, keep you going, that kind of thing. And it's just like any addiction. It's not until you put spacers between you and the addiction. And I talk about this in the book with my addiction to fast food, I would just stretch even one more minute not going through the drive-through, and then I would go through the drive-through. But it wasn't a failure because I had placed my definition of success on stretching the time in between fast food visits. And I think similarly, we've got to do something like that where we put friction in the way of ourselves and the social media because we have to recognize for what it is. It is a addictive drug, and AI is enabling that and accelerating that. Now, the oxytocin question that you posed and that, Dr. Gray had pointed out a long time ago, I think is fundamental to this equation because oxytocin and habenula, basically, habenula controls oxytocin, you know? And so if you are, what is social anxiety? What is social reluctance besides like, I don't want to, ask that person out, or I don't want to be their friend because I'm afraid of failing. I'm afraid of being rejected. Habenula, motivation killed. I no longer want to reach out. So then I look for the fast food of social connection. I can't live without oxytocin. I have to have it. So I look for cheap, quick, easy, guaranteed ways to get my oxytocin. Conspiracy theories online, multiplayer shooting games online. The young men are getting sucked into that faster than anything. Young women, comparisons on Instagram, all these things, like they start just freebasing this cheap, easy, safe way of appearing social, but it's social junk food instead of real social risk, real social skills, real social connection that really gives you oxytocin. And I think, it's all connects together. And what I predict is going to happen is that at some point, just like we all are not eating McDonald's 3 meals a day, there will be an awakening, and there is an awakening happening real time around how all this kind of like people don't feel good. That's the first sign. They're like their awareness of themselves, like, I don't feel healthy. I don't feel good. I don't feel good when I ignore my kid because I'm so addicted to my phone I can't look away, or I don't hear what they're saying about their school day. I don't feel good after I doom scroll because it turns on the habenula. And then I go to bed like that. I go to bed as a failure, you know, without motivation. I wake up as a failure without motivation. People are struggling with this. And depression. All depression comes from habenula. All habenula activation comes from a gap between what we expect will happen and what actually happened, or a fear of what's going to happen. It's the predictive negativity bias that we have to protect us again. So I think it's going to collapse on itself. And I think there will come segments of people who will learn how to modulate and regulate themselves with respect to these highly addictive things, because the hope is, not everybody's a heroin addict, not everybody. So we do, and not everybody's a smoker. So we do have skills once we're aware of the problem that we can apply, that we can iterate, which is the only way there. We can iterate our way out of what we are suffering from and towards something that is much more, like you said, holistic and healthy.
Yeah, I think awareness is key there. I mean, you brought that up quite a few times, and I think one of the things that you talk about, we hear about it, and we don't hear about it enough. Certainly not on mainstream media. We don't hear about it enough because I came out of the world of media, right? And more eyeballs means more views, and more views means more revenue. And
Yeah.
so, there's obviously a desire for these companies to keep us addicted, right?
Mhm.
Into this world where we can't escape, and that we just, like you said, the casino. I love that analogy of the casino because that's really what it feels like. Even if we're not all heroin addicts or smokers, it doesn't mean that we don't have this need to go to our phone, right? Because it's become such a habit, right? It's really become a habit. And so to kind of derail from that, it's derailing from connection in a way.
Yeah, let's debunk habit formation, because the current model for habit formation is I go there, I get a hit of dopamine, I get a reward, and then I'm willing to go back. Like that's kind of the loop, the trigger of reminding me, and the work I did in the behavior design lab at Stanford, which never got published, it's early days of Facebook. And we found that, what caused people to go back to their apps, we were asking about apps and emotions, was a slight sense of anxiety, which means that it was habenula driving the habit, you know, like, fear of missing out, checking disease. Like, early on, we were able to see that it wasn't dopamine, it was anxiety that was causing habitual phone use. And
Mhm.
so that's what's driving it. And so unless we cure the sort of fundamental neurochemistry and get really good at that, which is why I'm so passionate about people learning about their habenula and then being able to try to turn it off. Let's see what works. And let's iterate on ways that, because what's gonna turn your habenula off is gonna be different than mine. And if people have more history of trauma, more history of, emotional, stuff, their habenula's more trigger happy. It's more impulsive. It's more hyperactive. And so they're going to suffer the most. It's very unfair, in my opinion. The biology is very unfair to them, but this is what the science is proving out. And so what does that give us as creative responses for, like, what can we do to heal ourselves? What can we do to support each other? What can we do to come together? And I think that this very vacuous oxytocin, craving activity is going to collapse us back to the basics of being with each other and collaborating with each other. Because that's how we got here as humans. Like, we have no teeth, no nails, like no claws, no hair, but how we survived and how we got to where we are was
Yeah.
collaboration and connection with each other.
And we're wired for connection, right?
Absolutely.
Wired for connection. I mean, Dr. Shamini Jain, I don't know if you know her work, but she has a TED talk that's about being wired to heal, that we are naturally wired to heal. And in that premise, she talks about we're wired for connection, and we
Hmm.
need that connection. And I think AI, what it's doing, I mean, one of the things you said, it's disregard for so many things, but the one thing that I didn't hear, and that's the disregard for the creative process. And this is why so many artists are like, this is my world. Like, if you're not an artist, you don't understand that's a whole process for you. And when we
Hmm.
simply throw text into Chat GBT, whether it's text that we want coming out or other designs, then it removes that creative process for us, which really removes the juice and the joy and the love and the connection.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
That's why I really like the fast food and slow food kind of analogy, because I think
yeah,
we're there. Yeah.
I hope you're right. Actually, I hope you're right. So let's talk about the failure industry, because I
Yeah.
started my career in advertising in London.
That's
Actually,
about as intense as it gets, right?
well, not only that, I started at the top agency in the world.
Hmm.
So they
Hmm.
had the budget, they had the access, they had the clients, they had everything that they needed, to kind of keep us into that failure industry.
Yeah.
And that was before I moved into tech. So it was all consumer, right? It was all.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I had to laugh through parts of your book with this. I mean, it was sad, but it's so true, right? So I get it. And the failure industry does a really great job at keeping itself alive. Do you want to speak about that so that people don't get trapped right now?
Yeah. So I think we need to be serious about uh, our protecting our habenula from others, from the society. And I think, when somebody does have a control over you, when they can scare you, it's not the fear that's the problem. It's the fear of failing. Because if you're afraid, that's natural. But if you're afraid that it's going to be a catastrophe or that you will be losing your sovereignty as a person, you'll be losing your freedom, your privacy, if you're afraid that, that means that there's going to be people who don't understand you that are going to threaten your safety, whatever that fear is, if it doesn't connect to some prediction of this isn't going to work out for me, you know, then you would have the motivation to, flight, or fight. You would have the motivation. I want to point to people that it's not the fear. It's the habenula responding to the fear with loss of motivation of doing anything about it,
Yeah,
or being able to free yourself. And that's the stuckness that you're pointing to, which is that people only can get stuck. If I am stuck, that absolutely is definitive that my habenula is on. And I've got to find where the failure is, where the story or the hot thought of failure is happening to me subconsciously, usually, so that I can unwind that or answer it or put a salve on it to restory it, to reframe it, to, maybe I can't reframe it. Maybe I just need to like use pure kinetic energy and go do something, you know? There's so many clever, creative, powerful ways that a person who is not being held by a triggered habenula can work their way out of the problem. It's when people just kind of like numb out, distract, freeze, stuck, like that is habenula. And we just got these t-shirts printed at work at Fresh Try. It says like, you can't fail, keep iterating. And another one is like, don't let them get your habenula. Like that, don't let them get your habenula. Like just protect that from the outside world. Those who seek to control and have power over others, who want to dominate others, are doing it through the habenula. When two male animals fight for mating rights, the one that loses because his habenula is like, oh, this isn't working out for me. I better tap out here. I better like quit or run away or whatever. And so this is the mechanism that another person can control you by. Take it seriously.
well, one of the things you just brought up and some of the examples that people can use is reframing.
Right.
We could talk about that a little bit, go a little bit deeper with it, because the reframing bit, like just when we started our conversation and the lighting would, run amok, and
Yeah.
I can't pronounce the word. Like it was just started as a bad morning for me. And you just immediately went into reframing. So, I think it goes back to the awareness. And you write that our brains are terrible machines of reality, reminding us more than once that failure is an illusion and that failure is a perception of the brain. So, talk to us about that and then the reframing, maybe using a few tangible examples that people can relate to.
Yeah. So, when we were struggling with the sun today with you and your lighting, and I actually struggled with this last night because my social media folks were like, "Hey, we need you to like shoot yourself against a white wall." And so I was like on my 77th iteration of like turn this light off, turn that light on, turn like I was trying to because it was dark outside and I was trying to like figure out how to light my 54-year-old face in a way that was like going to be, cuttable to do commentary on other, on videos and papers and things like that. And when you were struggling with that, I had a lot of compassion, but what's different between you and I, right, at this moment, at this snapshot and moment, is that I know about my habenula and I know what it feels like when it's going on. And I know to like get on that right away, whereas you'll and everybody else, you're in the majority who don't yet know what it feels like and you haven't done the pattern recognition yet, but you will. Your brain absolutely will. And then you then struggle with failure coming in, failure thoughts, thoughts of failure, and all of its cousins of like, I'm not getting this lighting right. And I'm like, you look like an angel. Like you look like you're glowing, And that's a reframe. That is a reframe.
Right, right. That I
Cannot
don't like
fail.
a ghost or Morticia. It's just I'm an angel
You're an
instead.
angel. You're a glowing angel on screen. I can see you because I mean, like I have you full screen here. Um, yeah, and so that's the kind of thing that we need to really work on is what you would like even slightly believe could be the alternative reality of what your mind is telling you, like maybe I didn't fail that class. I'm just not going to be a history major, or like it's give me any sort of area of failure. Maybe I didn't fail a career. Maybe I was just hanging on to it. I shouldn't be there anymore. Like I myself was laid off, years ago. And that caused me to create this company, and the pinnacle of my work and my contribution to this world has come from it. So there's just all kinds of ways in which we need to have the skill of neutralizing failure, and reframing is a big part of that.
I couldn't agree more, actually. And by the way, that's a great segue to neuroplasticity, right? Because it's, those of you who are not aware of it, maybe you can do a quick summary of it. But, the idea is that the brain can learn new connections.
Yeah.
And when we learn new connections through new behavior, we're going to talk about iteration in a minute here. But, those connections are relearning. If we don't buy into that illusion of failure, right, we can create those new connections.
Yeah. So the only way to change your life is two things. One, that from the brain's perspective. One is you do it the slow way, which is you repeat something until it becomes your way of life. That's called a habit, you
Mhm.
know, and the reps makes it stronger, more reps, stronger habit, less reps, weaker habit. Like think about a bad habit that you want to replace, you know, how many reps does that thing have? So that's basically neuroplasticity, is that you're building this new, I call it like the highway, because it myelinates and it becomes really fast. And it may become the dominant way that you're doing something, but you still have this old copy with this many reps put in. It might fray, it might get weaker, but it's still there. And so one of the biggest mistakes that people make is in this illusion is I'm doing so well, I'm building this new habit, this great habit, and then I see myself relapse. I see myself do the old habit. And then I think that's a failure, big mistake, because now my habenula is on and I don't have motivation to do my good habit now. So number one rule is if you see yourself relapse, just get on the new highway again. Just do more reps over here. That's the best way to deal with that. And in terms of the failure, if you can neutralize the failure and just keep doing your reps, then your brain will change, because the other way to change your brain is something called significant emotional experience. This is what trauma is. Trauma is a significant emotional experience. Basically you have all this adrenaline just like all of a sudden shock your system. And what the brain does with that is it uses it as super glue to kind of glue a new neural network together that was activated under those circumstances. So let's say a bomb goes off or whatever. I'm a I'm a military person. A bomb goes off over this. I get PTSD because my body goes into shock with the adrenaline. It super glues all of the fear and memory centers and all that kind of stuff, fight or flight, all of that stuff like gets locked in place. Then I go, away. I go back home after my service is over, and I've got these loops. I've got these things that just are super glued together. The positive way is to set yourself up for significant emotional experiences that are positive. You could go on a fast or on a quest or on what's the word I'm thinking of? Like when you walk, my daughter went on the Pacific Crest Trail for 2 months and walked all of Washington State and all of Oregon, and in certain times was like outrunning a fire, like it was dramatic, but it changed
Vision quest.
her. A
Yes.
vision quest.
Yes.
It changed her fundamentally, so we can do these things that will promote neuroplasticity. But to our prior conversation, if we are so distracted that we can't, get that going, we might have to work on the habit end, and they both are needed. They're both needed. It's just that one is more in our control. the habit formation, and one is a little bit more like, iffy.
Yeah, the brain catches up, right? It may not understand what you're telling it in the moment, but it catches up. So if you just commit, and that can just be committing to, like you said, less drives through the drive-through, the fast food drive-through, and you just kind of stretch them out. And I think that's a really great example that I think everyone can resonate with, because whatever the habit is, if we can just break it up a little bit, then suddenly the need and desire goes away over time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly the habit that you should work on is the habit that you'll actually do.
Yeah.
But that's it. It doesn't matter what size it is. It doesn't matter how pleasant or unpleasant, because that varies from person to person, But the most important thing is like, can I get myself to do this? What can I get myself to do? And then on the backside of that, nothing's a failure. If you try something and it doesn't work for you, it could be like, that's not for me or that's not for now. Just really reframing how we hold our our efforts, our experiments, our gestures of trying to change our lives. Because one thing that can kill it right away is, that failure judgment coming in and being like, well, I just can't do that, or that's not for me, or, I used to be able to do that, or I should do that, but I can't, like all that kind of stuff.
Well, especially as we get older, right? I mean, I used to play competitive tennis. I'm not going to be doing that anymore. So, yeah, I think that we have to not just reframe, but also whatever we're doing towards our goal, whether that's weight loss or just, getting out of this addictive behavior or social media, right? It's celebrating the little wins.
Well, it turns on dopamine. The it's an emotional reward,
Yeah.
but also like certain personalities, if you're too skeptical or too cynical, it won't do anything for you because you can't believe in that, but you might believe in somebody else reassuring you or validating, what you're going through. So everybody's like has these little, you know, tricks or recipes, I should say, to turn off the habenula. Because when I hear like celebrate, like appreciate, that is a technique to turn off the habenula, but there's a million other techniques too. And that's where the iteration comes in, because people who have continuous efforts, who get the reps that they want to build the habit they want, the only thing that's different about them, in my experience, is that they experiment and then they iterate. Because iteration, the jury's never in. You never get a verdict. And your habenula is just like, oh, I guess we're not okay, like that's it, just avoids the whole habenula loop that happens.
So you've touched on this, but we haven't really talked to people about the bigger picture strategy that you've outlined in your book,
Mm,
which is this cool concept that you call iterates. And
yeah,
that's inspiration, time, environment, reduce, add, the word add, you can explain that, togetherness, expectations, and swaps. I thought it was brilliant because it's easy to remember, and it's easy to remember the examples anyway. So maybe you
yeah,
can talk to us a little bit about that, since it's
yeah. So yeah, like I think that, I want people to know what they're looking at. When they find inspiration from, a friend or an influencer or a famous person or whatever, they what they're doing is that they're picking up on that person found an iteration for how to do a thing that is inspiring to, me as a person. But where they get caught up is, I've got to do what Renee does, or I'm a failure. Like Renee's secret recipe, you talked about Tony Robbins, like people project onto those people that like, oh, that's the truth. That's the capital T truth. And they give over their own sovereignty of what works for them and what's going to work for them right now, and making that the best thing in the world. So iteration and iterates, these are mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, as it's called in business, categories that I have in my research chronicled and documented, that people are clever, first of all, and creative. And then number two, that they come up with these amazing ways that you would never think of, to get things done, to iterate on what they're trying to get themselves to do, as a habit or as an individual behavior. They're trying to get themselves to do this. And what we don't have is a way to really learn these things without getting caught up in, oh, that's the way to do it, and I've got to follow that exactly.
All right, last 2 points, and then we'll close. So I know we're going a little bit over, but um, this part of your book I absolutely loved. And so for those who are new to the concept of I am, in Eastern traditions, there's this idea of that we are not really this, right? We're trapped into the identity of who we think we are, which, by the way, I think lends itself to the idea of failure, right? Because we're stuck with this notion that we're this physical shell. And
Yeah.
and also in South America and many traditions there, they talk about it just as an illusion, as Maya, that it's not real, and that the realness is I am who I am, or I am that I am, or you could say I am consciousness, right?
Hmm.
So in your book, you write, I am are the most potent words that we can speak because it's what we tell ourselves is real, permanent, and true. And then, of course, it can have a negative impact and spirals down from there. So I loved when I read that because I thought of the I am who I am and the I am consciousness, which frees us from who we perceive ourselves to be, right? It's the non duality perspective, like I am the void, I am the stardust, I am you.
Hmm.
So I'd love for you to bring in some of your indigenous wisdom that you've learned from your mother's side, because I just absolutely treasured the fact that in a book that was really, written by a doctor, and you work with industry, you work with business, and yet you brought in this indigenous wisdom. So tell viewers and listeners about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just the interbeing is the most common thread of all indigenous people is the interbeing, the interbeing consciousness, the ability to see myself and the bird as one, and to really move through nature and walk through nature in a way that is of high awareness and unity, and also the pace of nature and the appreciation of everything that's happening, and not to over-identify like the Western culture indoctrinates us to do, not to over-identify as a distinct and separate self, and so one of my like passion projects eventually is like re-indigenizing people, because I think that we have kind of created a roadblock that we need to parse out. Like I do think that there's cultural appropriation, but I also think that there is wisdom that, for those who have, like on my dad's side and the Czech side, who have been cut off from indigeneity, even though they were farmers, you know, because they were immigrants, and they're not in their homelands. How do we really walk with respect? Because what's killing us as a species, and what's killing all the other species, is that we are shaming people for not being indigenous, for not that's no fault of their own. And then they are, anxious, and they're feeling othered, and they're not having oxytocin with respect to nature, or they objectify nature. That's a pretty tree, and that's a great trail for a workout. And that's like, it's that, like me and that is the duality being upheld there. So until we really like rewire our brains to be aware of the interconnection, the spirit that moves through all things, the energy that is the same in me is the same in you. The oxygen, the water, all of it came from and goes to other beings and cycles through, that we're all that, is.
There's no separation.
Yeah,
Right.
and we can't just like have a thought of there's no separation. Like, because that's just cerebralizing it, or bypassing, or intellectualizing it, and academically approaching it. So there's, of course, the big journey is like from the head to the heart, right? Like just being able to live with that awareness in one's heart and that worldview. And
And
I
we
think
call
iteration, going back to iteration, I think iteration is the path, because there was a study recently about, like, animals iterate on, so even when they have food and they have safety, they still iterate because they're constantly inventing. And these are like, rodents that are doing this. So we humans can't help ourselves. We're going to continue to iterate. Our DNA is going to continue to iterate. That is life. Life is moving. It is dynamic. If it's not, it's death, right? And so we really have to respect the the realm that we find ourselves in. It is illusory, but it is also this fabric, and it's also interconnected. Like, it's really hard, and it takes your whole life to even contemplate a portion of one of those things.
Well, I also think it's experience, right? Because I think when we're in our heads all the time and we're constantly analyzing or trying to figure it out, your funny example of, oh, that's a beautiful trail. It kind of reminds me of some people who go to Burning Man once a year and they're like, I kind of got my spiritual fix or whatever, as if that is the only meaning in their life, is this once a year, time in the desert, right? To become somebody else that they can't be at home. And I think, I'm very excited about what is coming out of MDMA research. It's starting to happen, right? And certainly ketamine is a step ahead there. And I just wonder, as someone who has done a journey myself, I know you went on an ayahuasca journey too. I think,
Accidentally.
yeah, accidentally. It's a great part, definitely a
Yeah,
very
read the
humbling
book.
part.
It's a funny story. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great story in the book. It actually reminds me of when I went to a Tony Robbins oneness retreat and didn't know what I was going for because I was invited by Tony. And I didn't have to, I was a guest. And I thought, well, why would I not go to Fiji? I didn't even know what I was signing up for. I had no idea, read none of the literature. And it was in part a silent retreat. And so people who know me well, you can just imagine what a surprise that was. I love that part of your and I think, just trust that when you're being brought on a journey somewhere, that it's for your highest good. And you did a great job, where you said, I just surrendered into it because I knew I was supposed to be there.
That's right.
And, I always tell, the people that we work with too, in our membership communities and groups, I always say, you don't need an ayahuasca journey. You don't need MDMA. You really don't need anything. However, there's different paths, and kind of as you brought up earlier, find your own path, right? Don't make somebody else's path. Just because someone else did an ayahuasca journey doesn't mean that you should, or maybe you should. It's more that you want to, as you say, iterate and try and try and try and see kind of what works for you. So, let's end on the interconnectedness, right? That nature is key, you right, and something that we teach all the time also. I was jumping for joy when you gave a nod to it, because I think it's the fundamental thing that's missing right now is, like you said, we don't feel that connection. Get out in nature, lie under a tree, feel it, just experience it. So any last parting words on nature as a healer and the connection to your work there?
Yeah, what I know is that we are our bodies are and our mind as part of that body, are engineered or naturally evolved into, I don't know how we got there, but what is true is that the further away from nature we are, the sicker we get. And the further away from each other that we get, the sicker we get. And so that's a roadmap that's very clear to me about where we need to spend our time and effort, is just really going into that connection. And even those that, go off in a cave and meditate to get enlightened, they're doing it in nature. They're not doing it in an office building, in a high rise in a city somewhere. So there's something very fundamental about what we're being called to restore in ourselves and each other, and also our relationship with the natural world. The animus is real. I absolutely have witnessed that multiple times. I've done vision quests since I was, 24, and every year. And so over 30 years, I have learned that we need to make ourselves available for it. and pull ourselves out of the matrix of the distraction.
Yeah, beautifully said. And that really comes with a commitment back to you, right? That we are the gurus that we seek out there, and just to allow and know your true divinity does lie within, right? There's nothing to chase, there's nothing out there that's going to do it for you. Anything else that you'd like to let us know about upcoming workshops or books or anything else that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't work. I don't have to work. I choose to work. And my most important thing is to do what I'm called to do. And what I'm called to do is get the word out. So, Unstoppable Brain is the only book where you'll find this information synthesized and made available for daily life. And then I also have a company, Fresh Try, TRI, that we have a free software for habit formation that is neuroscience based. And I'm trying to really overcome this very performative approach that we find in health and wellness programming, performative being goals and tracking and comparing and competing and all that kind of stuff. Those are fun iterations, but that shouldn't be the heart of it. And so my parting words are you cannot fail. Failure is an illusion. And I hope you believe me on that.
That's great, Kyra. Thank you so much. Yeah, just really beautiful work. And, I would definitely encourage all of you to pick up her book. I couldn't put it down. It was an amazing reading, throughout, whether you're in business or you're just looking for help in your personal life. So with that, we will see you on the other side.
All
Thanks,
right.
y'all. Thanks for
Thanks
tuning
for
in.
having me.